Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for being here to hear this talk. My name is Anthony Abbate. I am a research entomologist at Auburn University, and I work in the Auburn University Bee Lab. And today I'm going to be talking to you about establishing a wildflower meadow. So, from the beginning, what are wildflowers? Well, it's just like they sound. They're basically flowering plants that grow in the wild, and they're not intentionally seeded or planted, although we do this. What is a wildflower meadow? Well, when you take a mixture of annual, perennial, biennial wildflowers and native grasses and you throw them together in a mix, that's basically what a wildflower meadow is. But why would you include grasses? Well, when you include grasses in a wildflower mixture, it helps fill in the space where weeds would normally grow because you want to basically limit weed competition within your wildflower meadows. That's really, really important. You want just wildflowers and grasses within your wildflower meadows. And also, grasses provide cover for wildlife such as, say, quail. Why establish a wildflower meadow? You've heard about what wildflower meadows are, but why would, you want to establish one? Well, it actually provides habitat and food for pollinators, beneficial insects, and even other wildlife, other animals. It can improve soil health, prevent erosion, improve water quality, and can enhance forage for livestock. They also require less water and fertilizer, so they're a lot easier to maintain than just mowing your lawn every single week. So you don't have to do that. So that's a big benefit. And also, wildflowers are more tolerant to diseases and pests. And plus, it looks really, really nice. So I'm going to talk to you about some steps that I've developed, about establishing a wildflower meadow. There's about 8 or 9 steps, and the first one is to basically just identify your goals. Why are you planting a wildflower meadow? Are you doing it for aesthetics? Do you want it to look really nice? Are you planting to attract bees? Are you a bee lover and you want to attract native bees and say honeybees, maybe even? Are you wanting to attract butterflies? Do you want to just attract pollinators in general, such as, other wasps and flies and beetles and butterflies? Are you wanting to plant a wildflower meadow to attract wildlife and provide covers for other animals such as turkey or deer, quail, or even hummingbirds? Or are you, say, a farmer and you want to improve your soil health? And you can do this by planting wildflowers that are legumes, such as this purple prairie clover that enhances the soil. Step 2, you really need to identify the planting location where you want to plant these wildflowers. Is it an open field with full sun, or is it a shady location? Excuse me. Is there a large tree in that area that is going to cast shade in part of the area that you're wanting to plant? Some of these factors are going to drive which species you're going to plant because some species do really well within full sun environments and some do really well in full shade or part shade. So there's a lot of different components to this that you need to be thinking about. But ultimately, for wildflowers to thrive, you need a minimum of 6 hours of sunlight in order for them to do well. Step 3, soil preparation. I put a star on this slide and some of the next few slides because, in my opinion, it's one of the most important things. If there's any takeaway from this presentation at all, just remember these slides because it's really, really important. So better soil prep will equate to more flowers. You really want to eliminate the competition before you even think about throwing wildflower seeds on the ground. And really, you want to devote an entire growing season to address weed problems before planting. And what I mean by an entire growing season, I mean take the time during the spring, summer, and fall to get rid of weed species. Literally, do not underestimate how many weed seeds are actually in the soil. We call this the weed seed bank. There are thousands upon thousands of dormant weed seeds in the first, top 6 inches or so of the soil. And if you don't address these problems, if you don't get rid of those weed seeds or deplete them, you're going to end up with a wildflower plot looking just like the one on the right-hand side. So this is one of the wildflower plots that we attempted to establish in the Auburn area. And we didn't take care of the weed seed bank, and it just shows what happens. I mean, it's basically 99% crabgrass, and then there are some wild radish. Those are yellow flowers that you can see popping up throughout that space there. But we had basically 0% wildflowers pop up and establish because we just did not get rid of the weed problem before we planted. So follow my advice. Take my errors and learn from it because it's really really important. For soil preparation, if we're talking for large sites, and I mean several acres, you can continuously light disc the soil. And I'm talking about a maximum of 2 inches deep, beginning in the fall and then spring. And this can deplete the weed seed bank without exposing seeds deeper in the soil. So basically, what this does is when you run a disc, if you light disc, it opens up the soil. Some of those seeds that are on the top, 2 inches of the soil, they're going to be exposed. They're going to be exposed to the light, water, and newly open bare ground. And those seeds are going to germinate and they're going to grow. If you disc just before all those weeds go to flower and seed, they're not able to throw those seeds onto the ground. So you're constantly depleting the weeds, the weeds that are in the soil and the seeds that are in the soil. So if you can do this continuously, just keep disking it, say every month or so is probably optimal, then you will deplete the weed seed bank and yeah, you'll be ready to go the following year to plant. For small sites, and I'm talking smaller than a few thousand square feet, smothering the seeds, the weeds can be effective, and really seeds too. And this requires no chemicals or special equipment. Basically, you just cover the whole entire area with a clear plastic. This is important, it's clear plastic, not black. You cover the area for one growing season. So again, for the spring, summer, and fall. But the problem with this is that a large weed seed bank can still remain. So if you actually do this method, you apply the plastic for the growing season, but then after you take the tarp off, it's going to be basically bare ground, maybe some vegetation, dried vegetation, dead vegetation under there, but you do not till or disturb the soil. You literally just throw your seed down on top of it afterwards and press the seeds into the soil, and that is it. You don't want to disturb any of the soil below that, or else you're just going to bring up more seeds like you do in the light disking method. Also, you can use herbicides. You can use them for both smaller. You can use herbicides for both smaller or larger sites. Plan on applying a broad spectrum herbicide that contains glyphosate. You can apply herbicides 3 to 4 times during the growing season, and you want to wait between 6 and 8 weeks between those treatments. And if planting in the spring, apply another treatment in late spring or about 1 to 2 weeks before seeding. You don't want to spray your herbicide and then throw your seed right on top of that. It can affect the seed. So that brings us to the next part. Well, which species do I plant? Well, you really want to take a look at the species that you're interested in and make sure that they are native to your area. So if you're not sure, you can look up on this website. It's called the USDA Plant Atlas. You can type in the wildflower species. So in this case, it's Helianthus annuus, and this is the common sunflower. You can see it's native to every single state, contiguous states, United States. So this is a good wildflower species, but this is just an example. Just make sure that the wildflowers that you are planting are native to your state. And if you can even zoom in a little further here, you can see if it's native to your county. Just like if you bought a pack of vegetable seeds from your hardware store or your nursery, it's going to have a similar looking diagram or map to these two here. And these are called the plant hardiness zone maps. And it basically tells you what zone that you live in. So in Auburn, Alabama, we are in zone 8. And this tells us that, which wildflower species that we can plant. So if you look up particular wildflower species, and you can look this up on multiple different websites, and they're going to tell you which zones that those particular wildflower species can be planted in. Well, you want to make sure that the wildflower species that you are planting, that they're going to thrive in your zone, basically. So just make sure that those line up, and then your wildflowers will thrive. They'll have the best chance of growing. Lastly, well, not lastly, but flower color is also another important thing to think about. Flower color can drastically attract different pollinator groups, uh, whether they're hummingbirds. If you plant red flowers, hummingbirds are really attracted to red flowers. Bees are really attracted to, say, white and blues, and some beetles are attracted to red. So there's a multitude of different insects or animals that you can attract to your wildflowers depending on the flower color that you are choosing. And also bloom time. This is really important. So whatever wallflower species that you're going to choose for your wallflower meadows, you want to make sure that you are planting wallflower species that have overlapping bloom periods. So for instance, here is a diagram showing the bloom phenology of different wallflower species that are on the y-axis or the vertical axis on the left. And then on the bottom side, the bottom of the x-axis, you have the months. So anytime you see coloration along a wallflower species, and as it gets wider, that line gets wider, that just means that more flowers are in bloom. But the takeaway from this is that you want to make sure that you are planting a mixture of wallflower species that have overlapping bloom periods. This is really important because we want to be providing pollinators with pollen and nectar throughout the entire season. So it's really important to make sure that you have wallflowers that are going to be blooming in the spring and in the summer and even in the fall. So that's really, really important. So it's definitely overwhelming in terms of looking at wallflower lists and picking out species. So the USDA NRCS actually has a great list of wallflowers that they recommend. And you can right now take out your phones and take out your camera and scan this QR code. And basically, what that's going to do is it's going to pull up this document right here, this PDF document with all the wallflower species that the USDA recommends currently to be planted. So once you actually pull up that document, you can click this download button. And once you click that download button, you can click that little share button right there, and then you can share it to yourself either via text or email. That way you have that list after this talk is over. And if you still want that list, email me. I'm happy to email to you if you miss it. But one really simple thing to do is just take out your phones, scan that QR code, and you'll have access to it. So from that wallflower list that the USDA NRCS provides, we did a really interesting study here in Auburn, Alabama, to investigate the attractiveness of some of those wallflower species to see, which species are highly attractive to native bees, because ultimately we want to plant to attract the highest diversity and abundance of bees. So for this little experiment that we ran, we chose 18 species from that list that I just showed you from that QR code. And we chose 18 species to assess their attractiveness to native bees. And there's three criteria for selection for why we selected them. One, well, they're recommended by the USDA NRCS to be attracted to bees. They bloom during the spring, summer, or fall, and they are very easily available for purchase. We want to make sure that whatever recommendations we are making, we want to make sure that you can buy them, that you can find the seed, that you can buy the plants, that they're not overly expensive. That's really important to us because we want to be able to promote these plantings as much as possible. So for our experimental planting in Auburn, Alabama, this occurred in 2019. We established a 388 square meter field, and each one of those 18 species was planted in 4 1 square meter subplots surrounded by a 1.5 square meter buffer. It's like a checkerboard pattern. And we basically quantified floral blooms from May to November of 2019, and we conducted these sweep netting surveys in the morning, midday, and afternoon because this is really important. Some bees are only active in the morning, or they're more active in the morning. Some are only really active in the afternoon. So we wanted to make sure that we were catching representatives of the bees in this area visiting these wildflower species. And basically, anytime that a wildflower species was in bloom, so on the right hand side, you can see one of our technicians here. She is standing in front of Gaillardia pulchella or Indian blanket or fire wheel, and she's netting bees on those floral blooms. And we basically quantified all the bees that were visiting the blooming wildflower species, and we identified those bees to species. So from that study, here are some of my recommendations. This is a really good starting point for building your own wildflower meadow species list. So for attracting the greatest number of bees, so this is the column, the third column over from the left, this is for bee abundance, lanceleaf coreopsis, blanket flower, black-eyed Susan, butterfly milkweed, purple coneflower, gray-headed coneflower, goat's rue, blue vervain, partridge pea, narrow sunflower, goldenrod, frost aster. Those are all really great species for bee abundance. For bee diversity, these plants were equally just as good. So those species for bee abundance, they attract really a high diversity of bees as well. So you're kind of killing two birds with one stone with that. So I highly recommend those that are starred for both attracting high bee abundance and bee diversity. Now, if you're interested in attracting, say, uncommon bees, the ones that are starred in that in that column right there, blanket flower, black-eyed Susan, butterfly milkweed, gray-headed coneflower, goat's rue, blue vervain, goldenrod, and frost aster. Those are really good species to attract uncommon bees. And then lastly, for people that are interested in attracting honeybees into their wildflower meadows, butterfly milkweed and blue vervain are great because they produce copious amounts of nectar that honeybees will readily visit and collect. But overall, I would say the top three species, and I call them powerhouse species in terms of attracting just high diversity of bees, high abundance of bees, and both uncommon bees, and then sometimes honeybees, blanket flower, butterfly milkweed, and blue vervain are just powerhouses. They're outstanding. I highly recommend planting those if they're native to your area. Lastly, well, not lastly, but once you figure out which species of wildflowers you want to plant, next is figuring out when you want to plant. Really, you can plant in the fall or the spring, but really the fall is the best time to plant your wallflowers. And it all comes down to the question, have you prepped your soil? That is the biggest component to this, that you're going to be way more successful if you take the season and really prep your soil. But some of the seeds do need periods of cold stratification in order to germinate. So they need those periods, those cold, wet winter months in order to germinate. So that's why a fall planting is preferred. But ultimately, just come up with a plan and stick with it. It's okay to change little things here and there, but really just follow your plan. Take care of all the weed competition before you plant your wildflowers. Once you figure out which species you're going to plant and you figure out when you're going to plant, you have your seed now. You basically have to spread the seed out. So you can hand broadcast seeds. This is appropriate for 1 to 2 acres, smaller areas. And you want to add a filler material such as, sawdust or compost, vermiculite, sand, something that you can actually add to the seed to add some bulk. And you want to scatter the seeds slowly and evenly over an area. Do not rake in the seeds because the seeds need sunlight in order to germinate, and if you cover them, they're not going to germinate. So literally just scatter your seeds out on the top surface of the soil, and then just compact the soil. It's really as simple as that. This is a method called the split and sand method. So basically you have all the seed that you're going to plant for your wallflower meadow. You split that pile into 2 separate piles and you add your filler material. And this is basically 8 parts of your filler material to 1 cup of seed. And you want to add each of those mixtures to a bucket. So you're going to end up with 2 buckets, and there's a reason for this. That first bucket, if this is your area that you want to plant your wallflowers in, first you're going to walk in one direction and you're going to scatter your seeds evenly. And that's basically to get a nice even coat. You're working from one direction to the other. You have your filler material so you can actually see where you're placing your seeds, because some of the wallflower seeds are so small you can't even see them once you throw them out. So by adding the bulk material, the filler material, you can see exactly where you're throwing the seeds and where they're landing. Next, you take that second bucket and you just go in that other direction. And this is to basically fill in some any gaps that you missed. And you're basically laying all the seed down really, really evenly. Now, if you have a larger site, you can use a hand operated crank seeder or even an ATV mounted seed spreader. I mean, these work really, really well, but you still want to mix the seed with filler material, no matter what method you're going to use. Next is to compress the seeds into the soil once you've thrown down your seed. Compressing the seeds ensures good seed to soil contact to help speed up germination. For really small patches, just use your feet. Just stomp around and your seeds will be fine. They'll germinate. You're not going to hurt them by stomping on them. For medium patches, you can use a seed bed roller. For larger plantings, you could use a seed bed roller that's attached to a tractor. But again, do not cover your seeds. The seeds need sunlight to germinate. Lastly, watering. This isn't always necessary, but the seeds do need to remain moist in order to sprout. And the seedlings need to stay moist until they're roughly 4 to 6 inches tall. Sometimes this can take about 4 to 6 weeks. Usually, what I like to do, just check out the weather. Plan to throw your seed down just before it rains. That way you don't have to water. You don't have to get a hose out there. Be lazy. Let Mother Nature take care of the watering. But if it does get really dry out there in your area, if it doesn't rain for, say, I don't know, 5 days, 6 days, up to a week, and it doesn't rain and you're trying to get your seeds to germinate, maybe go out there and just water it a little bit. Your seeds will benefit. The wallflowers will thank you in the end. So the next step, once you have your wallflower seeds down and they sprout, you need to maintain your wallflower meadow. So plan to mow your wallflower meadow back in late fall or after the wallflowers have died back. Mow about 6 inches above the ground as to not kill the remaining wallflowers that will come back next year. So a lot of them will basically stay dormant, but vegetatively, and then they'll still grow next year. So a perennial. Not mowing at all will ultimately lead to natural succession. So bushes and trees and other weeds will eventually move in. So you want to make sure that you are doing a mowing in the fall. Now, for the Xerces Society, I only learned this just recently, and I thought this was fascinating, and it makes total sense. So during the first year of establishment, mow your wallflower meadow down to 4 to 6 inches when the vegetation reaches 6 to 8 inches. So if you look at that picture that's kind of inset on the larger picture there, you can see that there's small wallflowers growing, and that's Desmanthus ilionensis. Those small seedlings take some time to grow up and to reach some height, and you can see those grasses that are basically towering over them. It's creating a lot of shade, and those wallflowers absolutely need sunlight. And if you're mowing that vegetation down, that just enables the sun to reach the ground, reach those wallflowers, basically little saplings or little seedlings that are trying to grow. So make sure that you mow down to 4 to 6 inches during the first year. This makes a lot of sense. This reduces weed competition too during the first year, and it will result in more wallflowers in that second year. Don't feel bad if there are some wallflowers that are blooming and you're kind of lopping off the wallflowers that are in bloom. Don't worry, they'll bounce back. They'll be just fine. Now, if you're interested in establishing a wallflower meadow, but you don't have the funding, there are some programs that are available to farmers. Some Farm Bill supported programs. The NRCS has some programs that can help with finances of establishing some wildflower plots. So please check out some of these programs that are available to you. They're really excellent. Here's some additional references that you can check out. All of these are some of the resources that I've used in the past. So I include the USDA Plant Atlas, Prairie Moon, Missouri Botanical Garden, wildflower.org is great, American Meadows, xerces.org. Some places to buy seed that are, in my opinion, fantastic: Roundstone Seed, Ernst Seed, Prairie Moon Nursery. And with that, thank you very much. I appreciate it, and I'll take any questions.